I can play you another one. There's another one I can play that I know. This one we're just working on. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shumate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvise Sunyavadi Pashati. Start the video. Start the sound. So, Hare Krishna to everyone. Thank you for coming. I wanted to begin with a question that came up today of how we understand what self-care is in different situations. So, last night I talked about how sometimes you sacrifice yourself for another person and you burn out. And so I wondered what he was saying. Well, at least in Indian culture, in the past at least, you would just sacrifice for your family, sacrifice for the elders, and you didn't really think so much about yourself, and the glory was the self-sacrifice. Right? Is that true? Does that still go on, or that's the thing of that went on in 1950 or something? Still goes on some places. Anyway, you understand the idea. So then that appears to be a contradiction. It's like that's part of our culture. We sacrifice ourselves, right? Yes? Teeth? Acha hai. So, I want to explain how this works. If I sacrifice for the well-being of other people, that actually enriches me, doesn't it? Like it's good for me. Because we make all kinds of sacrifices to help people become Krishna conscious, and it's good for them, and it's good for us as well, right? So when you serve and you help others, you benefit from that. But there has to be a certain barrier there, because you could destroy yourself in service, right? It's possible, right? So if I burn myself out, if I become sick mentally, physically, in the name of service to others, that obviously is not self-care, because I didn't have clear boundaries, and then I'm no longer of service to anybody. So sacrifice is good. So I was giving the example today, like let's say we're doing a food program. We're distributing prasadam to poor people. And all the servers take a break and they eat. And nobody's going to say, how come you're eating? You're supposed to be serving. It's obvious why they're eating. Because if you don't eat, you can't. You're not going to be able to serve. So it's the same with anything. We're serving, we benefit from the service, but we also have to take care of ourselves so we can do the service, so we can maintain our position. So, if we look at this from the modes of nature of Bhagavad Gita, the mode of ignorance is the mode where everything is destroyed. That's passion is misery and ignorance is destruction. So, if in the name of service to family, to country, to cause, I destroy myself, that's the mode of ignorance. That would be service in the mode of ignorance. So it's not a value. Does that make sense to you? Like if I destroy myself by trying to serve, it's my duty to serve, but it's not my duty to destroy myself. It's my duty to maintain myself. So that would be sattva-guna. You'd be maintaining yourself. So then you get the benefit of service, but not at the cost of your own material or spiritual well-being. And there's a story, and I was there when this happened. Some devotees were in a Bhagavatam class. This was in Los Angeles, 1972, and they were coughing, and the coughing was continuing, and Prabhupada stopped and said, why are you coughing? Don't you have warm clothes? It's the winter. And stopped the whole class and gave a lecture on that you should take care of yourself. Because as young boys and girls joining ISKCON, we were very much in the mood of self-sacrifice. So we would sacrifice things we shouldn't sacrifice. That was when we'd sacrifice sleep. We'd sacrifice, we'd want to make sacrifices because that's part of bhakti. But some of the sacrifices weren't intelligent. And because those sacrifices ended up harming ourselves, then we could say we sacrificed in ignorance. So it's like in the Bhagavad Gita, everything's in three modes. So just because it's good doesn't mean it's good, because you can do devotional service in the mode of ignorance. You say, how do you do devotional service in the mode of ignorance? You fight with everybody, you strive to get in control, you become a dictator, you criticize, you think you're the best devotee. That's all devotional service. I'm doing service and I'm criticizing everybody. That nobody does service like me, or why you all this, or why you all like that. So that I'm doing devotional service, but it's bound by ignorance. The quality of it is ignorant. So you can take something pure. Anything pure can be done in an impure way, or for an impure reason, right? My wife does a course on the 6 human needs, Maslow's human needs. And in part of the course, she shows how these needs have to be fulfilled, and how there are ways we can fulfill them. There are healthy ways and there are unhealthy ways to fulfill needs. So the needs are good, but you can fulfill them in a tamasic way or a sattvic way. So if you fit, like one of the needs is to, what is it? How's it called? I don't know if they call it recognition. It's you want to be valued. Does anyone know what it's? Significance, yeah, it's called significance. So, for us, significance sounds like, no, that's not what we want. It means you want to be validated that your life is valuable, right? Because if you're not validated, why would you get out of bed? It's like, what's the point? Nobody cares, right? So some people get significance by going into a school and killing people. That's how they get it, right? And they're all over the newspaper. And even if they die or kill themselves, they die famous in a bad way. So now you're significant. That's how you got your significance, but it was completely tamasic. So anything can go either way. So you self-care is kind of like that boundary that you don't go beyond. It protects you from doing things which would be damaging. So I just wanted to cover that. Okay, so we're going to begin where we left off, and we're reading letters and other things Prabhupada said, letters, lectures, books. And the topic of this slide is called spiritual suicide, which of course is a paradox, oxymoron, because the soul's eternal. So how can you have spiritual suicide? So we learned last night, if you damage your spiritual life or kill your spiritual life, that's the definition of spiritual suicide. So you could have had spiritual life, but you didn't take advantage of it. You chose something else than your spiritual life. You gave up the opportunity to gain an eternal life with Krishna in the spiritual world, and you decided to do something that would keep you here, creating karma, come back, get the results of your karma. So Prabhupada's explaining that in this letter. This is a darshan. So you voluntarily accept the cycle of birth, and you don't accept Krishna, then who can help you? So Prabhupada's saying, I'm in this cycle of birth and death, and he's saying, this was voluntary. We signed up for this. This was not like, this didn't just like, you two go to the material world, you two go back to Godhead, you two go to Brahman, you two go to Shiva Loka. And it wasn't random. It's like we chose. We voluntarily chose this. So Prabhupada's making the point, as spirit soul, we have choice. So you voluntarily chose the cycle of birth and death and not to accept Krishna. And there's so many verses about this, how we turned our back on Krishna. It was our choice. Then who can help you? If you have decided to cut your own throat, how can I help you? You'll do it. Whenever you'll get an opportunity, you cut your throat. How much I can give you protection. So Prabhupada's saying, just like if I give you good instruction, it doesn't mean you're going to do it, right? It's totally up to you. So So if you're being self-caring, you'll take a good instruction, you'll think, that's a good instruction, I should do it. Or like we talked last night, if you're a bona fide teenager, I don't know if you're a teenager yet, but when you become a bona fide teenager, you'll say, that's a good instruction, but who cares? I don't care. So sometimes we as adults act like that, don't we? So Prabhupada is talking as a guru. I cannot help you. What does that mean? If I instruct you and you don't do it, what more can I do for you? I'm not going to tie you up. So you get an instruction and you have a choice. You do it, you follow it, or you don't. And if you get an instruction that can liberate you from the cycle of birth and death, and you decide to neglect it, then that's spiritual suicide. And that obviously is not self-care. It's what Prabhupada called self-envy, but I explained that self-envy meant self-hatred. You don't consciously feel like you hate yourself, but your actions demonstrate objectively that you do. Like, you ever like see somebody doing something that's bad for them, and you're trying to reason with them? Say, why are you doing that? Do you hate yourself? You want to harm yourself, right? So materially, I think we can clearly understand it. So spiritually, it's the same thing. Why are you doing that? You have this opportunity. You want to harm yourself. And so we're not thinking unconsciously I'm harming myself. But Prabhupada wants us to see that. That's what we're doing. And so, why would you harm yourself? So we had talked yesterday that sometimes when the mode of ignorance is strong, we don't care. I know I'm harming myself, but I don't care. Like what? And mode of ignorance is always destructive. So I'm destroying myself and I don't care. Like, that's crazy, isn't it? And that's one of the definitions of the mode of ignorance. Craziness, madness. Right? Bhagavad Gita. If you're in the mode of ignorance, it creates madness. So, as you listen to Srila Prabhupada's lectures, as you read Srila Prabhupada's books, a theme emerges over and over again. And it's important to understand this. And I think it's even more important if you're from India, because as Westerners, we weren't raised as Hindus, so we weren't confused about Hinduism because we didn't know anything about it. There was absolutely no confusion. And whatever we learned about Hinduism, it was actually Vaishnavism from Prabhupada. So we weren't like trying to make sense of something with what we already knew, because we knew nothing, right? But if you already know something, then, religion is something you use to help your material life. That's part of it, right? And it's like, I call it an assurance policy, or as we say in America, insurance. Why are you going to the temple? I need insurance. Oh, I didn't know there was an insurance salesman. No, I need to go see the deities so I don't, they'll protect me. My insurance policy. And then my business will go well, my studies will go well, we'll be healthy and so on. Like that, right? So that's kind of the paradigm that we grow up in, and you go to the festivals and it's your duty and so forth. But Prabhupada's saying, no, it's much more beyond that. It's a personal relationship of love. And this life is meant for focusing on liberation, going back to Godhead. That's what it's about. Not just being religious. Because you can be religious and you'll be here for many lifetimes being religious. But you can go back to Godhead. So now if you don't take advantage of that opportunity, then you're not fully self-caring for yourself. Because I don't know about you, but taking birth and growing up wasn't like the greatest thing. And I was joking when we were in Tawako because it was snowing. It was like 18 at night. I guess it was pretty cold here last week, was it? Yeah. Similar, like 18, 20. Anyway, I grew up in Southern California, so there's no snow there. And it doesn't get that cold. And now I live in Florida, and generally it doesn't get that cold. So I was a bit cold in like 20-degree weather with the wind blowing on me and snow everywhere. So I was joking with the devotees and I was saying, before I decided to come to the material world, if I knew it was going to be that cold, I definitely would have not decided to come here. Because I don't like cold at all. Like, for me, it's like, if you want me to suffer, just put me in cold weather. It's like, that's the worst for me. So had I known it was going to be this cold down here, I would have not decided. That's a joke. But you could, anything you don't like about this world, you could make that joke, right? Had I known that this job would be so hard, I never would have come to the material world, right? Or if you get sick, had I known it'd be so difficult to have a material body, I would have decided not to come here. But Prabhupada's message was always like, you can get out of that cycle in one lifetime. And if you actually care about yourself, you will do that. At least you'll try to do it. That self-love, that self-care. And if you know how to do it and you neglect it, then it's a kind of spiritual suicide. Does that make sense to you? So we discussed that yesterday, and we're discussing it more. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. Want to go to the next slide? Srila Prabhupada was asked, what is the devotee's greatest enemy? Does anyone have an idea what Prabhupada said is the devotee's greatest enemy? Well, if you've already heard what Prabhupada said, you can't answer. I want someone to try to answer who never heard what Prabhupada said. What do you think the devotee's greatest enemy is? You've heard the answer?
I haven't heard.
Okay, take a guess.
I would say lack of motivation.
That's it. It's in the ballpark.
Maya seems to.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, it's kind of a manifestation of what Prabhupada said. Well, any answer you give other than the real answer will be a manifestation of what he said. Anyone else want to guess? Yes?
Distraction.
These are all kind of like symptoms of what Prabhupada said.
Like one soul, maybe?
What?
One soul? Oneself.
Yeah.
Or maybe like in the Bhagavad Gita they say that.
That's the answer, yeah. So go to the next slide, it gives you the answer. He himself, these are the answer to who's the greatest enemy. He himself, because he's a rascal. He's his greatest enemy. So just get out of this rascaldom and you become your friend. Nobody's enemy, you are yourself your enemy. So Prabhupada's saying, you're your friend, you're your enemy. We know the verse Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. So it's like in our Vaishnava culture, in Indian culture, we understand the value of blessings, don't we? So we go to a saintly person and say, please give me your blessing. But I always say, maybe not always, but I often say, you should learn how to give blessings to yourself. And what are those blessings? Well, the blessings come from the order of the Guru. So the Guru can give blessings, but the real blessing is the instruction, and you have to bless yourself, because if you don't take the instruction, then it's of no value. There's your prasadam, but you don't eat it. So bless yourself also. It's an important philosophy, and what is Prabhupada saying here? So you can have all the blessings in the world, you can have all the opportunities, everything, and not take advantage of it because you're not acting as your own friend. You're just throwing it away, right? So that's our individual choice, because we're Jiva Tattva and the Jiva has independence. We all have choice. And independence is good. Now some of you think, well, independence is not good because if I didn't have choice, I would be in the spiritual world. I wouldn't have come here. Because I was stupid, I made a bad choice. But if I couldn't make the choice, that would have been better, right? Well, not exactly. I mean, could you imagine not having any choice? Like, what would your life be like? You're like an AI robot. So the good news is that we have choice. And the bad news is we made a choice to come here, and the good news, we can use the choice to get out of here. So the thing that got you here can get you out. So it's good we have choice, because we can choose good things, right? And if we're in a mode of ignorance, we'll choose bad things which are harmful to us. So here's an idea that a lot of us don't think about. is we have a relationship with ourselves, like similar to a relationship you would have with someone else, because we talk to ourselves and we take care or not take care of ourselves, right? Have you ever done something that you regretted? Of course, we all have, right? So after you did it, what did you say to yourself? That was stupid. I'll never do that. Why did you do that? Don't ever do that again. Have you ever done something in which you feel so bad you wish you could just leave your body because now you have to live with the guilt of it? Yeah. That's a relationship. That if I do something and I know before I do it, I'm going to regret doing it and I'm going to feel horrible. And then I go do it. Now I have to live with that. So that means I have this really awkward relationship with myself that I'm willing to do something that would harm myself, that would cause me to suffer. Like we say, I hate myself when I do this, right? Okay, if you hate yourself when you do that, that means you and yourself have a relationship. Right now, when you do that, it's kind of like you're in an adversarial relationship, right? So, doesn't it make obvious sense that if I actually care about myself, I wouldn't do something that makes me feel bad? I wouldn't do anything that would cause me to hate myself? Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe? Right? Yes? Yeah. So, let's say you have to study, and I won't study tonight, I'll study tomorrow morning. And you never study in the morning. You never get up early enough to study, right? So, if you're doing that, you're acting out of self-harm. You're harming yourself, because then you go to class the next day, and the teacher's like, so, here's the pop quiz. And I didn't do my homework, I can't answer it. Like, I hate myself, I should have studied. So, I think it's just interesting to just focus on this idea that we have a relationship with ourselves. Have you ever lied to yourself? Well, some of us don't know that we've lied to ourselves because we lie about lying to ourselves. It's like we're one step removed. No, I never lie to myself. Oh yeah. Well, now you're lying about lying to yourself. You know what I'm saying? So, I didn't really do that. It's not my fault. Like we're lying. That's a weird relationship, isn't it? To have a relationship with someone and you lie to them. Well, what about lying to yourself? That's a weird relationship. And then lying about lying to yourself. So we have this relationship. And so when you start thinking, oh yeah, I have a relationship with myself. I have a relationship with Guru. I have a relationship with Krishna. I have a relationship with the Vaishnavas. We always talk about that. Nobody talks about the relationship we have with ourselves, which is the foundation for all the other relationships. So, when you understand that you have that relationship, it's like, okay, that's interesting. That means, just as I would treat another person well, or not well, harshly or kindly, I do the same thing to myself all the time, right? Okay. If you say to yourself, when you make a mistake, well, everyone makes mistakes, and I think I can learn from this mistake, and I'm just going to try to be better. That means you're being your friend. You're encouraging yourself. If you make a mistake, and you say, I'm so stupid, I'm so useless, then you're being your own enemy, because how's that going to help you? Right? You ever say that to yourself? I'm so stupid, I'm so useless, I'm so... If you do, it doesn't help you. How could that possibly help you, right? I read something recently, which is quite interesting. I don't have the source. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't really need to. And maybe this is obvious, but sometimes we bully ourselves. Like someone may bully you, but we can also bully ourselves. We could say the same things to ourselves that the bully says. But what this research found, if I remember correctly, maybe someone could correct me if you know. What I remember, it's saying either it has the same effect as someone bullying you, or I remember it as it has a worse effect. Does anybody know? Has anybody heard this? I heard it has a worse effect when you do it on yourself than if someone else does it. And I think we have that experience that, you know, if you say I'm stupid, I'd be like, whatever, you're stupid for saying that. But if I say I'm stupid, I take it seriously. It has much more detrimental effect on me when I say it. So every time I make a derogatory comment about myself, you're not good at this, you're so bad, you never do anything right, you always lose. You can't do this, you can't do that. You're in an adversarial relationship with yourself. Because imagine the way you speak to yourself, you'd speak to somebody else. Then it's like, oh, I wouldn't speak to someone I liked like that. Isn't that interesting? I mean, if you actually think of some of the things you might say to yourself, you'd realize, I wouldn't say that to someone I loved. So what does that mean? I guess I don't love myself because I'm always pounding myself up. There are psychological reasons we might do it, but I just wanted to put it in that context. There's another thing that's really interesting. When you grow up, people will tell you things about yourself, like you're really smart, or you're not really smart, or you're really talented, or you're not, or you're good for nothing, or you're good for everything, or something, or you're going to be successful, and you're not going to be successful, and or the worst one, you're not good enough, you're not perfect enough, you know, the next door neighbor's better, why don't you, your brother's better, why don't you like him? And so when we hear those things, it affects our identity. So we start to think of ourselves that way, and then we start treating ourselves that way. And it's not like really our fault, it's just that that's how we were programmed, so we just repeat the program. And so when you understand that, or when you look at yourself and you think, why am I doing that? Why do I treat myself like that? And then you might understand, oh, because that's how I was treated when I grew up. So I don't even think about it. I just developed that identity. So it's good to be aware of these things, because when you're aware of them and you, thank you, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. When you are aware of these things and you start framing them in a context of self-care, then you think, oh, this is not self-care. If I were self-caring, I wouldn't say that about myself. It doesn't help me. Does that make sense? So Prabhupada's contextualizing it totally spiritually and saying, okay, when you're making bad choices about your spiritual life, this is like the highest degree of harm you could do to yourself. Or if you're making proper choices about your spiritual life, it's the highest degree of love. There's nothing higher, because you could love yourself back to Godhead or hate yourself back in another body. Right? So, and who knows what the next life is. When I was in Los Angeles, Prabhupada said something amazing. This was 1972. So that's 52 years ago. Prabhupada said, you don't want to come back and take another birth, because Kali Yuga is getting so bad, it's going to be hellish. So most of us, I was 22 at that time. So Prabhupada's saying you don't want to come back. So, you know, what's the average lifespan? 80 years or something? Is it more or less? Let's say 80, just to make the math simple. So that was 1972. Well, just round it off to 1970, right? And you're going to live to be 80. So what year does that take us to? It takes us to
2050.
20?
2050.
20.
50.
20. No. 2050, I would be 100.
2030.
Yeah, it's like, it's somewhere coming in the next 5 10. Because I'm 73. So it's 7. So it's like, within the next, you know. So Prabhupada was talking about within the next decade, things are going to get hellish. I was like, that's interesting. Have you noticed? Things are getting weird. You notice more because India's like, can't even imagine India would ever be this way, right? When I first went to India, I don't remember seeing a married woman in anything but a sari. I mean, I could be wrong. And definitely no jeans. And definitely no miniskirts. Or tight t-shirts. So we've seen in 50 years like crazy things, and the 50 years before that also was more conservative. So then Prabhupada said, and this was so interesting, Prabhupada was dealing, in this lecture, he was continuing this thought. He said, you don't want to come back and take another birth, it's going to get really bad. And so sometimes you think, well, it's not so bad, have a good job, a nice house, and I'll do some good karma, maybe I'll take birth in heaven or something. So Prabhupada said, no, it's going to get really bad here. What guarantee you'll go to heaven? And then he said that as devotees, we know in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, well, if you don't perfect your life, you'll take birth on a heavenly planet, you'll enjoy, and you'll come back. Or you'll take birth in a family of devotees or aristocratic family. Because if you take birth in a wealthy family, then money's not a problem. If you're interested in spiritual life, you can do it. And he said, but Kali Yuga is such, you may take birth in that family, and then you may just get enamored by the wealth and opulence. And I grew up about a mile from Beverly Hills, and I worked in Beverly Hills. And I worked for a drugstore. This is my joke. I delivered drugs. Like I go to a corporate, thing, and they go, well, when I was young, I delivered drugs. We're a drugstore, So I delivered drugs in Beverly Hills and Bel Air, which is even more amazing than Beverly. Beverly Hills is nice, but Bel Air is like, that's where you go when you're a movie star or high end, whatever, where you have money to burn, then you can live there. And it goes up in the mountains, and so that's where I would go. And I grew up around there, so I know what it's like. And so when Prabhupada said, maybe you'll take birth and it'll be so nice you'll forget Krishna, and immediately my mind went to Beverly Hills. I said, yeah, take birth in Beverly Hills. And that could be like it for becoming a devotee. So we can say that Prabhupada, if you really analyze what Prabhupada's saying in this context, he's really saying you should care more about yourself. You should care more about your spiritual life. That's what he's saying. It just doesn't come out the way I'm saying it. But if you analyze it from this perspective, you'll see, oh yeah, that's exactly what he's saying. Your highest self-interest is to serve Vishnu. Prabhupada would say that. This is in your self-interest. So again, self-care. This is good for you. Sometimes he would say, this is good for you. He wouldn't always say, if you love yourself, but he would say, if it's good for you, you should do it. It's the same thing, isn't it? More or less. Does that make sense? So this was a theme that we saw often in Prabhupada's lectures. And you will find a certain number of lectures where at the end of the lecture, Prabhupada would say, and go back to Godhead. Like that's the conclusion of the lecture. We do A, B, C, and D at the end. And so that was kind of like, yeah, that's the goal. That's what we're doing. We started the Hare Krishna movement so everyone can get out of the material. This could be your last life. And so Prabhupada would kind of end, yeah, this is the conclusion, this is the theme. Go back to Godhead, and all the devotees would say Jai. And so, yeah. And so we, as young brahmacharis, brahmacharinis, we were just, if someone said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going back to Godhead. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. That's my mission in life, is to get out of this world. I've been around long enough. I'm not so inclined to do it again and again and again after doing it unlimited times. So that's Prabhupada's theme. And let's go to the next slide. So, self-respect. When we show up as the person we hate to be, we lose trust and respect for ourselves. It is when we show up as the person we most want to be that we naturally respect, trust, and feel good about ourselves. This is really important. I could go for like 4 days just on this. We can't act against our values and feel good about ourselves at the same time. acting according to our values, according to what we know is right, is a fundamental expression of self-care. So I want to unpack this, and then we'll have some questions. This is so good. Okay, I said we have a relationship with ourselves, and I didn't mention this aspect of ourselves. And I did a course on vows. I created a workshop on vows. And while I was creating that workshop on vows, I was thinking, okay, you make a vow and you don't follow it. So what happens? You just lost trust in yourself. You say, I can't believe myself because I make promises and I don't keep them. Isn't that interesting? You ever thought like that? Like, yeah, tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock, I'm going to get up. In the back of your mind, if you're like, you're not. Because you say that all the time. So you don't even trust yourself, right? And so if you can't trust yourself, what happens? You lose respect for yourself. Just like if I can't trust you, I lose respect for you. You say you're going to do something and you don't. I lose respect. I tell myself I'm going to do something and I don't. I lose respect for myself. That's so important to understand. When you make a vow and you don't follow it, it's your sense of self just becomes very weak. Isn't it? You can't even take yourself seriously, so you lose self-respect. But if we do the opposite, we gain self-respect. We feel good about ourselves. And so a self-caring person would build their self-respect. I would think, wouldn't you? Yes? Isn't that interesting? Now this next point, the second paragraph, this is really beautiful. We can't act against our values and feel good about ourselves at the same time. So, I think this is one of the most important things to contemplate regarding self-care, because one of the ways that we as human beings experience deep satisfaction and happiness is when we act according to what we believe, when we do what we know we should do, right? And one of the ways we suffer, maybe more than anything, or at least high levels of suffering come when you don't do what you know you should do, because you're out of integrity with yourself, and then you have to live with this self that's always doing what you know you shouldn't do, and you're always doing what's harmful, and it's very painful, right? So, in modern materialistic society, in order for business to thrive and the economy to thrive, we have to be told that if we don't have a product or service, we won't be happy, and if we have it, we will be, right? So we go shopping because we're trying to buy happiness, so we buy things that will make us happy, right? That's the idea. But if you think about it, the thing that really makes you happy is when you live in integrity with who you are, what you believe, and for us, in the Shastra, that's what makes you happy. If you're out of integrity, you can't buy things. You don't buy your way into happiness. You buy your way into comfort, but not happiness. You have to be in integrity with your values to be happy. So I buy a nice chair, a nice sofa, and I'm very comfortable when I sit miserably on my chair for not living my values. But at least my body's comfortable. That's all. That's all that happens. But there's not happiness there, right? Isn't it? Does that make sense? So when I think of self-care, this is something that I really like to stress, because we can really make ourselves miserable by not living according to what we know is right. And we can make ourselves very happy by living according to what we know what is right, and that's called integrity. You're doing something and you know you shouldn't be doing it, and you can't enjoy it because you know you shouldn't be doing it. And that's a definition of the mode of ignorance, because Krishna says in the mode of ignorance, your happiness and suffering are mixed together at the same time. So I'm doing something, it's giving me some pleasure, but I know I shouldn't be doing it, so it's giving me some misery. So there's no, like in passion, you get pure pleasure because you just kind of forget everything else and you go for it. And then you suffer afterwards. But in ignorance, the suffering and the happiness, it's all like one. So I'm trying to be happy. doing something that goes against what I believe, it goes against the teachings of the Gita, what I value, how can you be happy? That doesn't make any sense. So a self-caring person understands this, and the self-caring person realizes, I need to, if I commit to something to myself, I need to do it, because that's self-care, and if I don't do it, I'll suffer. Isn't that beautiful? And I just think that's like extremely high level of suffering, to be out of alignment with what you believe. And here's the other thing, which is interesting. Before you became Krishna conscious, you had values, which you imbibed in your culture, in your family, in your religion. And when you come to Krishna consciousness, you get more values. Like every verse of the Gita is something to follow. It's a value, right? And very high values, like probably the highest. Like very high levels of integrity are required, very high levels of self-control, So it's even harder to live in integrity because we have you become a devotee and the standards go up. It's like harder, And so it's just interesting to note that if you want to take the spiritual life and you want to take to it seriously, the bar is higher. So it's more of an opportunity to suffer if you don't follow, and it's more of an opportunity to have this amazing life if you do follow. But it's like every time you sit down for a class, every time you put on a lecture, you're getting imbibed with values, which consciously or subconsciously, if you don't follow, it's going to cause you distress. Something inside is not going to be right. Isn't that interesting? So it's kind of like we're in a sense, you're jeopardizing yourself by learning how you should act. Because what if you don't? And now you know. I mean, I didn't know, before I was a devotee, I didn't know so many things that were bad. We didn't know in America. And so I learned what's bad. And the things that now, after being a devotee, will make me feel guilty if I don't follow, never made me feel guilty before I was a devotee, because those weren't my standards. Right? Then as you progress in spiritual life, your standards go up. So, in any case, self-care can help in this area, because you'll understand, okay, I have a relationship with myself. That's profound, isn't it? I'm dealing with myself all the time. And when you start thinking like that, you can be more self-caring, and you'll feel much happier. And you won't need so many things to make you happy. Like, why do we need so many things to make us happy? Because we're not living in integrity. We're not self-satisfied. We're impassioned. We think, I need more. Right? It's like a frenzy, like Black Friday or something. I have to have these things. No, I have to be self-caring and self-loving, then I'll be happy. Okay, so we are going to stop now. And we're going to take questions. Yeah. I have a question or a comment from Kamala Lochan, and he's in Delhi. Somewhere in Delhi. Kamala Lochan, you'll be happy to know Delhi is not the biggest city in the world. Tokyo is bigger. What's the population of Delhi? Like 27 million or something? Does anybody know? 22, 27, some crazy number. Tokyo's 37. 37 million people in one city. That's a definition of insanity. If I ever heard, isn't it? Like, why would you want to do that? Maybe because you live on an island and there's no room for people. That could be. All right. Prabhupada said that philosophy without religion is mental speculation, and religion without philosophy is fanaticism. Isn't practicing one without the other self-harming? Yeah. And what are the boundaries we should maintain in respect of both philosophy and religion with regards to self-care? Well, Prabhupada's point was, if you have no philosophy, you don't know why you're doing something, so you just do it, and you don't think. And Hridayananda Maharaj talks a lot about religious people who have no philosophy. He talks a lot about scientists who have no philosophy. They're not philosophers, they're scientists. They don't know how to philosophize. Their atheistic arguments aren't really based on logic and philosophy. So, you want to make sense out of, you want to understand, why are we doing this ritual? What is the meaning behind it? What is the philosophy behind the action? And if you don't have that, and if you just have philosophy, then you have no action. You don't do anything, you just sit around and philosophize. So, you need both. You need to understand why you're doing something, and you need to do practical action. Okay, we have a question here, maybe. If you hate yourself, how to feel and truly believe differently? You have to backtrack. Like, it's not natural to hate yourself. You would have to have been conditioned to think that way, either by somebody making you believe that, or you interpreting things in that way because of some other kind of social conditioning. But when you understand conditioning, it's like, conditioning, it's subconscious. You're doing things without thinking. And so, how would you reprogram from I hate myself to I'm okay? How would you reprogram yourself? That's the question you need to answer. I mean, the devotee who's asking it needs to answer that question. What are the constituents of self-care, of self-acceptance, self-love? What does it mean? And how, and understand, how did I get here to hate myself? Like, what was the process? And if I wasn't conditioned that way, would I hate myself? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't hate yourself. Like a lot of times we're conditioned to think in a certain way, but if we were raised on the other side of the street with different conditioning, we wouldn't. It's not even like coming from us. It's like put in by somebody else. So, all of us are conditioned, some in good ways, some in bad ways. And some of that conditioning is very helpful for us. It causes us to be good people, have a work ethic, be controlled, be compassionate, kind. And some of the conditioning is harmful. So it's natural, isn't it, that when you understand what is harmful, you want to purify or heal from it or do something, because otherwise it controls you and it's not what you want. Right? It's kind of simple, isn't it? So simple nobody gets it. But that's actually what's going on. It's like, let's say, there was a movie called Twilight Zone. And in Twilight Zone, this was long ago, Twilight Zone, I grew up watching it, so it's the 1950s or something. So they go into this like surreal, when you enter the Twilight Zone, it's surreal, and so surreal things happen. In one show I remember, there was an elderly couple, and they were walking in a showroom, and the showroom had different couples in glass cases, and they could choose whatever couple they wanted to be like. The couples are all 25 years old. So, let's use this as an example. Okay, so you go in this showroom, and you're like, you're 75, and you're like, I'm pretty old. Be nice to be like 25 again. And I want this time around, I want blonde hair, blue eyes, and like a bigger body. I'm kind of skinny. I want a bigger body, a little more muscular, etc., etc. And so you could choose it, because this is what I have now. And, if I don't have to keep this, I get a new one. Why not? So in the same way, it's like conditioning. It's like, well, how do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? And it's the kind of person I am now. And you could choose to be different. You can actually do that. You can choose to be a better person. You can choose to overcome the conditioning that is not beneficial for you. And if you think that way, then it's kind of simple. So that's just what I'm doing. So if I love myself, I have a vision of how the person I want to be. And for us, it's easy because we're already given the vision, 26 qualities of devotee. How do you want to be? I like to have all of them. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be nice? You have 26 to the maximum degree. Yeah, that's what I want to be, right? How many do I have now? Oh, maybe minus 26. So, okay, well, that's my conditioning. Let's work on it. Let's do something. That would be self-caring. So you can do that. Don't think you can't do that. Sometimes it feels like you can't do it, but you could do better anyway. Maybe not overnight, but we can work on it. I was just talking to a devotee, and he has issues with anger, and I think he was thinking like this is how he is, but it caused tremendous problems in his family for his wife and daughters, and now he's getting help to overcome it. But before he just thought that's how he is. He couldn't do anything, and so when you think that's how you are, then you don't do anything, and then you suffer the consequence. So you don't have to suffer the consequences of conditioning. You're going to improve. So that's the answer. And now what I would, whenever you want to change, it's always good to have an ideal. Like, who do I know that's a very self-loving person? Now I have an example. I can just, kind of follow them. I'll emulate them. What do they talk to themselves? How do they deal with other people, I see this person, they're very self-loving. And if anybody says anything bad about them, they're just like, well, I'm sorry, They don't get into scuffles, and it's not what they do, because they want to protect themselves because they care about themselves. So if you're around somebody or you learn about people who are like that, it's really helpful. Any qualities you want to develop, be around someone who has that quality, or think of someone who has that quality, understand how they act, and then try to emulate that. And it's a very simple way to do that. Okay, we have another question. Sort of. That was just that was a say hello, not a question. I have a question from Olga. How to make peace with my own past mistakes and sins committed before I found Krishna's spiritual principles. Is there any penance that would help to absolve them? Yes. This is the penance you have to do, Olga. Write this down right now. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And when you chant like that, if you want to do penance, you can say, Krishna, please forgive me for all those sins I've committed out of ignorance, and I will never do them again. That's your penance. Your real penance is to stop committing sin. I mean, like when you take initiation. You make a vow, the 4 pillars of sin, I'm not going to do them. That's my penance. I did them out of ignorance. Right? So, look at that picture of Krishna. You like that? Is that good? Yeah. You know the story of Jagai and Madai. When Jagai and Madai committed every sin imaginable, right? When they finally surrendered to Lord Chaitanya said, I will relieve you of all your sins as long as you agree not to commit any more sins. So your real penance, Olga, is not to commit the sin. And you're not as sinful as Jagai and Madai, I can guarantee you. There's one other person, I forgot his name, I read in Shastra, who was worse than Jagai and Madai. I thought Jagai and Madai held the record for sins, but apparently this person beat them. Jagai and Madai did not get the gold medal for sins. This other person did, but they were in a close second. And far more sinful than any of us. And Lord Chaitanya accepted them. Sometimes we feel like, well, I'm not like anybody special. Why should Lord Chaitanya accept me? And the reason is because he's somebody special, not because we're somebody special. So he accepts us because he's special. Just like if I were wealthy, I could give money to anybody, and someone might say, why are you choosing to give me money? It's because I'm generous. Not because you're special, but I just want to help you. Or I'm compassionate. So you don't have to be special, Olga. You just have to follow Prabhupada's instructions, and Lord Chaitanya will forgive you because he's special. You don't need any other qualification other than to just follow his instruction. And that was what Lord Chaitanya asked Jagannath. So you promise you won't commit any more sin, and then I'll forgive you. And then all their sins were relieved. And they had committed so many sins, Mahaprabhu's body turned black. You know that? You know that's true. His body turned black from their sins. Hare Krishna. Okay, so does anybody, I'm just looking here on the pew, can you take the slideshow down so I can open up and see who's here? Someone may have their hand up, I don't see.
Should we check if there's questions here?
Yeah, of course.
Anybody have a question?
Yes, go ahead, I'm listening.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So this is a question actually from yesterday's class, but relating today because you touched upon it a little bit. So you had this dial, I hate myself at 0, and then I love myself at like 20 or something. And then he said that we should all endeavor to be there, like I love myself by the end of this course. So I was just thinking, how does it, how do we reconcile this with humility? Because when I say love myself, sometimes it can be like being narcissistic, being too much self-centered. And also, like in our Vaishnava literatures, like all the great acharyas, they kind when they give the prayers, like Narottam Das Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they say like I'm worthless, I go in the stool and something like that. So how do we, if we have that kind of mentality, if we try to cultivate that, and then I also love myself, and how do they go together?
Yeah, well, let's go back to the definition we gave of self-love. That everything I do is favorable for my bhakti, and everything that's not favorable to my bhakti, I avoid. So being humble is favorable to your bhakti. Humility is a manifestation of love of Krishna. And humility manifests as the feeling and the vision that others are better than me. This has nothing to do with self-love or not self-love. It's just what manifests on the level of prema. So it's something. Humility is like the fruit of love of God. But humility for us, we're trying to be humble. We're trying to be respectful. If I am respectful of other Vaishnavas, does it help me? Yeah, it helps me. If I have 10 devotees, does it harm me? It harms me, right? If I can be more humble, my chanting will be better. If I can be more humble and keep my false ego under control, I will be less envious, less jealous, etc. All that is good for me. Yes? So if it's good for me, it's self-caring. So being humble is self-caring. Because it's a humility is one of the most essential aspects of being a devotee. So if I'm humble, that is like puts me in the best possible position to be Krishna conscious. And it's the most favorable position. And when you talk about like Narottam Das Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and the other acharyas, their level of humility is actually incomprehensible to us because we don't have that experience. So you have to be a little careful in trying to emulate that humility. Because, you try to lift 300 pounds just because Mr. Atlas can do it, and you're trying to be Mr. Atlas, that's a mistake. So sometimes we try to imitate a higher stage of bhakti, and we're not on it. And so what I think is most prudent is for us to translate what would humility look like for me right now. Like it's like, this is my little joke. It's like someone is trying to emulate the kind of humility of the great acharyas, right? And they're going up to devotees and saying, Prabhu, I'm so fallen, you're so great. And then, an hour later, they're having a big argument with somebody. or they're criticizing somebody. Have you seen that? That's what Hridayananda Maharaj calls hyper humility. It's artificial. It's false. So rather I would think, I do think, it's better to think, for me as a sadhaka, at my present level, what does humility look like? And so we start thinking, well, appreciating devotees, don't criticize, cooperating, getting along, saying I'm sorry, forgiving, not being envious, and all those things. That's real for us, and all those things are good for us. Does that make sense? So I'll give you an example. If someone hurts me and I develop resentment for them, or I don't develop resentment, what would be more self-caring? Not developing resentment, right? And so you might say, can you actually do that? And you actually can. And as a person who's self-caring, I would think, this person has hurt me, but I now could spend the rest of my life with this person in my heart and my anger towards them. That's not very self-caring. So I'm going to let this go because it's of no value to me and it's only going to harm me. And so a lot of us say, well, how can you let go? You let go because you realize if I don't, I will be harming myself. So we said last night, you don't die from a snake bite, you die from snake poison. Not the best example. And the analogy, it breaks down a little bit, but the idea of the snake poison was how we react to what happens. So we get bit by a person. But then the poison is coming from us in our reaction to it. So a self-caring person will say, okay, maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's my karma. I don't know. But it seems unjust and wrong. But I'm going to let it go because if I don't, I will suffer. I will cause myself so much suffering. Like Nelson Mandela finally got out of prison. People thought, you must be really angry with these people who imprisoned you because you didn't do anything wrong. And he said his thought process was, well, I'm leaving prison now after how long was he in prison? 20 years or something. I'm leaving prison now, and if I don't forgive the people who put me in prison, body will be walking out of prison, but I'll still be in prison because I'll be imprisoning myself with my hatred and my resentment. So that's how a self-caring person would think. Maybe they're wrong, maybe I'm right, but do I want to suffer to be right? Maybe I'll just let it go. Because that would be the best thing for my spiritual life and my emotional life and physical life. If you want to be unhealthy, I can tell you how to do it. Like one of the best ways is hold on to resentment. It works really well to keep you sick. It could even give you cancer. So it's like when you understand that and you understand the body-mind connection, the stress, the anxiety, and all of that, and you want to be self-caring, you'll start to do things differently. You won't get stressed so much about things because you'll see it's detrimental. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what I'd like you to understand, that self-care, it's a frame of mind. It's like if you have that frame of mind, then automatically you don't have to think about self-care because that's how you'll act. You say, well, this person's hard on me. I'm not going to think about it. Why aren't you going to think about it? It's unjust. They shouldn't treat you that way. because I don't want to harm myself, because I will harm myself by confronting them, dealing with them. Maybe I need to confront them for my own well-being. That's different. But if I don't, it's a choice that I make to protect myself. So that's the context I'm in. I can tell you, having taught forgiveness multiple times, resentment is not something you want to carry with you. It does you no benefit and only harms you. And so sometimes when people say, how do I forgive? The simplest answer I could give is, upgrade your self-care and you'll automatically forgive, because you'll realize this is poison. I'm not going to carry this around. This is ridiculous. Have you ever been in an argument with someone and you know you are 108% right and you can't convince them? And at some point you just say, okay, whatever. Because you just, this is useless. It's just causing you too much stress. So you give up the need to be right to just have some sanctity in your life, right? Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. I think it's time for prasadam. Is that? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So as part of practicing self-care, sometimes we put ourselves in a comfort zone. This is my zone. This is what I can do.
Right.
I can't go beyond this.
Well, the problem with being in the comfort zone is the comfort zone is not the zone of self-care. Comfort zone is the zone of tamagun. Because comfort zone is where you stop growing. Right? And I read something that's so interesting. If you think of your goals, the things you really want in life that you don't have now, like the difficult things, they're all outside. Here's your comfort zone. There's a circle. They're all outside that circle, because in the circle you already have what what you're able to get. And the reason you may not have those things outside the circle is because they're difficult to get, so they're out of the comfort zone. So you only get what's easy. And so when I read that, I thought, this is really interesting. Like, everything we deeply want is outside the comfort zone. So then one devotee said, the comfort zone, I think he said, is like the dead zone. And I think of the comfort zone as the uncomfortable zone, because you're not comfortable if you're not achieving what you want. So therefore, if you really care for yourself, you go out of the comfort zone to achieve what you really want. So nobody should ever think that taking care of yourself genuinely would make you apathetic and comfortable and weak and so forth. It's just the opposite. Because if I actually care for myself, I would want to. Right? I'd want to do more. So that's a very important point to understand. And I think it's very simple. Because that, you say, well, if I become self-caring, I'll be apathetic. My answer is, being apathetic is not self-caring. So it's kind of, you can't have that argument. At the same time, you say you're self-caring, because self-caring is a sattvic thing, and comfort is, a tamasic thing. It's lazy. Right? Yes.
This regarding the sacrifice, there are, like in Indian culture, usually what we teach or then what we learned was, you help others first.
Yeah.
And then that way nobody usually tell you that take care of yourself first.
Right.
And then help them the others. So
Yeah. So now you can tell them Prabhupada said, save yourself first.
And then I have a question on that same thing.
No, I'm ready to sacrifice myself to serve you, as long as I'm able to do it physically, mentally, and spiritually. So I have to maintain my strength, physical, mental, spiritual, to do it. Right? Kind of common sense, isn't it?
Like in the Ramayana, Jatayu gave up his life, right?
Yeah.
So how does it go around?
That's a choice a devotee could make. So I'd rather, it's not it's not something you imitate, and it's not something Prabhupada did. I mean, in a sense, you could say he did. I think sometimes you'll see with great devotees, there's a combination of both. Like on one hand, they're making huge sacrifices, and on the other hand, they have, like Prabhupada, everyday walk, 2 massages, travel with his own cooks, he had secretary. I mean, if you travel with a personal servant and a secretary, and you get 2 massages a day, and you exercise every day, you're pretty self-caring. At the same time, you're traveling all over the world, which is total self-sacrifice. So he was kind of like balancing both, So he had to have sufficient self-care to make this other sacrifice. So a lot of devotees do that. But Vishitayu, there may be this, devotional heart that says, I want to give everything to Krishna. But what we see is that unless you're very advanced, you'll burn out and it'll backfire. So I want to give everything to Krishna within reason, right? It's like, when I was a young devotee, when I first joined, we were sleeping 5 hours every night. And we were taking cold bath in the morning. So, Ayurveda said yogis take cold bath. Later I found out it was like, should be like lukewarm, not freezing cold, right? So I'm not getting enough sleep and I'm taking cold baths. I was living in Berkeley, near San Francisco, so it was like in the 40s. So where the water must have been like high 40s, low 50s. It's pretty cold. And every 3 weeks I got sick. Like I would get sick on the 4th week. I would get sick, it'd take a week to recover, and then 3 weeks later I'd get sick. And so, I was trying to sacrifice sleep less and so forth, but I couldn't do it. So what's the point? It backfired. And then one day, 20 years later, I thought, I'm going to stop these cold showers and this 5-hour sleep. And I stopped getting sick. But what's a really good, I think, a fantastic example, and probably none of you are completely aware, but after Prabhupada left, he had appointed, most of these men were GBC, different parts of the world, and they would become gurus, and they were like extremely successful. And in their zones, basically everyone would just become their disciple. So it was very easy to manage. You had a whole zone of your disciples, right? And very intelligent and very powerful devotees. And so the 3 years after Prabhupada left, the movement expanded more than when Prabhupada was here. And in Europe, they were buying these big castles. Bangladesh was bought at that time, and then New Mayapur was bought at that time, and Eastern Europe was opening up, and Russia, and all this was happening. And then some of those devotees had, in my opinion, not taken well enough care of themselves, materially and spiritually, and they couldn't do their job anymore. They couldn't maintain their position as GBC and Guru, and they stepped down. And if they were just GBC, it would have been a problem, but not a great problem. But because they were gurus and most people were their disciples, it created havoc, as you could imagine. Like a break of faith through the whole community. My guru was just left, and he was the person we were serving, doing all this austerity for. So, outside of the UK, I don't think any of those zones are near what they were then. And we're talking then is 1986 for most of them. For one of them, it was the late 1990s. The other ones were mid-80s, and the zones never recovered. 35, 36, 38 years later, it's not as good as it was. So when I look at that, I think, so if those devotees didn't work so hard and burn themselves out and remain stable, those zones would be phenomenal now, but they didn't take care of themselves, which I believe is the first duty of a guru, is to nurture themselves so they can nurture others, but they didn't. And they couldn't do it, unfortunately. So, does that make sense? Yeah. Is there anything else?
I have one comment.
Okay.
I was just appreciating when you were discussing being hard on ourselves, and instead of I hate myself, and it's okay, I made a mistake. And it's something I did with my daughter when she was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old. And she would make a mistake, and I would say, that's okay, we all make mistakes. And I said that, several times to her. And then one time she had like a whole cake she was holding, and it was, I don't know, for somebody in the family's birthday, and she dropped the whole cake. And I went, oh, wow. And she looked up at me, she goes, it's okay, right, Daddy? Everyone makes mistakes. And I thought, wow, that was an impression she had.
Wow.
And I was like a little on the edge there. I went, oh yeah, that's right, honey. We all make mistakes.
Of course. Yeah. And if you had a bad experience with her, she could remember that her whole life, right? Yeah. She probably remembers this one, and she'd remember the other one.
Yeah. So we can train up our kids that way, how we respond to them, and they have that. I had one question.
Okay.
What I see is sometimes we've made mistakes. We've been what we consider I've been bad, and then we'll think, well, maybe Krishna doesn't like me, or Krishna's upset at me, and we walk around thinking like I'm in the doghouse with God, and that affects our spiritual life because
it's a problem for many people, but there's no evidence that you're in the doghouse. There's no verse. There's only verses that you're not in the doghouse. I mean, if you're Jagai Madhai and you don't give up your sins, you'll be more than in the doghouse. But for a devotee who's trying and he makes a mistake, sadhara eva samantavya. Consider him a sadhu. And the verse in the 11th canto where Krishna is saying, my devotee's trying, but sometimes he falls down. But he's sincere. And so Krishna's glorifying him for trying. Just like you appreciate your children when they try, even if they fail. And one time a devotee was like having difficulty, getting up, falling. He was so depressed and discouraged. And Prabhupada said, don't worry, you're just a young devotee, this is normal. So I think we have high expectations for ourselves that are not realistic, and we become discouraged. Think about how many lifetimes you've been in the material world doing what people do in the material world. It's like just the fact that you're a devotee is amazing in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you got to alter how you see it, and that's how Krishna sees it. Krishna's not like, forget this devotee, he only chanted 4 rounds today. Send him to the dogs. We don't want to see him. If he tries to get in the spiritual world, we're going to send him back. He's not like that. And the fact that we would think he's like that, how do you think it makes him feel? Think about that.
Yeah.
Like you have a friend and you think this friend's out to get you and he's not. How does he feel? So, it's better to see and feel and understand Krishna's love than project our own guilty conscience on him. Because that's what we're doing. Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
His Grace Mahatma Prabhu ki. Thank you, everyone. If anyone, last night we had the book table.